to new research from Fathers for Justice. Here is its founder, Matt O'Connor.
COVID-19 is having a heartbreaking impact on separated families, especially dads. 1 in 10 dads have not seen their children in a year, and on average, dads have gone 3 months without hugging their kids. We agree with 62% of parents who said the government should make it an offence for parents who use COVID-19 as an excuse to stop contact.
This is East Hearts Radio.
Plenty of rain overnight. The showers could be heavy and prolonged at times. The winds will strengthen as well. Temperatures overnight shouldn't drop any lower than 6 or 7 degrees Celsius.
The coolest station online.
Yeah, that's us.
'Cause we play
This. It's here. Now 107. Now 107. Now that's what I call music.
You're listening to East Hearts Radio.
Number one.
I love the music, takes me back to when I was younger. It's just a good music mix and you can sing along, it's all sort of happy times and yeah, I love it.
It's the best local station.
East Hearts Radio, your local community radio station.
Local radio by local people.
For more details, visit our website, eastheartsradio.co.uk.
You're listening to East Hearts Radio. Listen on your smart speaker. Just say, play East Hearts Radio.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the second ever broadcast of Conversation with Chris, discussing political issues both nationally and locally. I'm really excited for today's broadcast because we've got a few callers calling up. We finish and draw a line for a few weeks anyway in our topic about Boris Johnson. Last week we had a very balanced call, in my view, giving both criticism and praise. We've got two sides of the argument this week, which we'll go into. We got some criticism in one call, we got some praise in the other call, and so we have a little chat about each part of that. And we have Mr. Robert Halfon, Chairman of the Education Committee and MP for Harlow, who is joining us at the end of the show, who I'm extremely excited to have as my first politician on the show. I contacted Rob Halfon and he replied extremely fast and said that he would be honoured to come on, so I'm extremely grateful to him for that. So without any further ado, I'm going to go over to our first call with Mr. Dennis O'Sullivan at Chauncy School, because we had, and I must put it out there first, he had so much to say and it was really, really good, and we asked for 10 minutes of his time and he gave up an hour to have a chat with me about various things: Brexit, immigration, the government, the opposition, so much. And unfortunately, because we are limited on what time we have, we can only play so much of it. But Mr. O'Sullivan knows that he's always welcome to come on this show to talk about some of the things that we haven't been able to broadcast this week. And I hope that maybe in a few months' time, when things are safe, maybe he and I can do it in person and do a full-length feature interview. You know, here's hoping, because he had a lot to say, some of which I agreed with, some which I disagreed with, but it was all very, very important stuff. And I think that, you know, as somebody who is a local, important figure of the local area, it's important that we hear him out and discuss these things with him, you know. So anyway, without any further ado, I'll go over to that first conversation. I'm very, very excited to bring on our first real special guest to the show, which is my former headmaster, Mr. Dennis O'Sullivan of Chauncy School. Now, I'm extremely excited to have Mr. O'Sullivan here because I'm not sure if he will remember this, but back in 2015, I remember when I was off to go and vote for the first time, and as I was leaving the school, I don't know if he was coming back from voting himself, but he was on the way back from somewhere, entering the school, and we stopped for a lovely little discussion. You know, we're just having a chat about, you know, things which we were concerned about in the political atmosphere that we live in our country, and so it's really good to have him on, because when we were on together the other week with Mickey, he gave some views of his of the government. I thought let's bring him on and let's hear what he's got to say, because obviously he is a very important figure of the local area. He's a head teacher and he does have, you know, a lot of responsibility to play in this role as somebody who, you know, has a lot of kids to look out for in this pandemic. So first of all, Mr. O'Sullivan, thank you for coming on to the show, sir. How are you?
You're welcome. You're welcome, Chris.
So, Mr. O'Sullivan, sir, schools going back. Is now the right time, now that we have over 15 million people vaccinated with the first jab, or does it need to be a little bit longer?
Well, we keep getting Boris predicting things he's going to say in a month's time, and he always says, if the science is right, then we will act. It would be quite unusual if he did act in a timely manner. But I guess these 15 million people, all those over 70, they can come back to school tomorrow then, as long as they're taught by people over 70, and there's nobody under 70. The vaccine's meant to be there to stop the spread of the virus, and there's no better place to spread a virus than having people just a little bit older than you, Chris, all smooching around together. So is it the right time? The government also say that their number one priority is getting schools back. Their number one priority in getting schools back is to enable parents, particularly primary school parents, to get back to work. And that's okay. To suggest that their number one priority is to get ordinary kids back to school so that ordinary kids can develop the skills and knowledge and abilities and relationships they need to do well in this society, I think he'd be having a bit of a laugh if he said that.
So, but obviously there is, because the reason I do ask, sir, is because obviously apart from the education effect, there is obviously the mental health effect. Do you not think that the government are taking that into consideration as well? Because obviously we are living, I'm very fortunate to have lived in a household where if I was under this current circumstance, my parents be working very hard with me at home, as I'm sure, with the teachers' support over Zoom and online and everything is happening. But obviously there are kids who are at home who don't have the same support and motivation in certain parts of the country as they do elsewhere. Do you not think the government is thinking about that as well?
No, I don't. I think that when the government's talking about mental health, it ought to maybe pop in some of the areas I used to live and work. I was born in Willesden in North London, and we had our full range of social evils and ills that come about from living in a working class area where there is quite frequent unemployment, where there's overcrowding, where the housing conditions are all crushed together, where the schools aren't necessarily very good, where the health service is overstretched. If he wants to talk about mental health, maybe he should have been in the tower block I used to live in Stratford in East London, when a woman on the 24th floor with 3 kids, her mental health was so great, she threw herself off. Lives for so many working people, for families not really coping at all, for immigrant families in this country, and by immigrant families I include the Irish as well, my own people, for the families that are not welcomed in society and are subject to racism and discrimination and prejudice. When they go on about Marcus Rashford, bless him, the professional footballers, for all their ills, there's no reason why they should be racially abused for missing a goal. So we've got lots of ills in society, lots of things. I did some free school meal deliveries.
I saw so. I was very happy to see that. I saw that Chauncy was doing there. I congratulate you on that.
There's an organisation called the Jedediah organisation, which also provides us with parcels to give to kids. And I've been to places in Ware and the villages where, the places, the houses are crumbling. The people are in, they're not dressing from Hugo Boss and whatever the female equivalent of Jaeger or anything. So when we're talking about mental health, being stuck at home is hard. But if you're stuck at home in a tower block, it's harder than being stuck at home in a 3-bedroom house in the village.
Well, exactly,
when you're stuck and, when you've got no money, because they're going to cut universal credit again. There's £20 that they're going to cut from it, because £20 from Boris Johnson or Rees-Mogg's money or my money is virtually going to have no effect. But you cut it from somebody bringing up a family of 2, 3, 4 kids in cramped conditions. It's a lot. So mental health, some kids are getting stressed. But where was the talk about the kids' mental health when we were in school full time? Where's the funding for counsellors? CAMS, as you may well know, has got a queue a year long. and that's for young people's mental health. So if the government was worried about that, maybe they should have done something then. Their priority now is to get us back to school, to get the primary school parents back to work.
But then surely, so when
they care so little about teachers, they've cut our pay again this year and said we're not getting a pay rise for 3 years. They're going to treat us just like they treat the national health workers and all other ordinary working people in the country. We really, really don't count very much.
I'm sorry, again, you may be a little bit more educated in this area than I am, sir, but I thought that it was a few months ago they announced that teachers were getting an actual pay rise.
No. For the next 3 years, we're getting nothing. They did give us a pay rise in line with inflation for the first time in a decade last year. But I run a school. I run the budget. When the government decides to give all the teachers and all the other staff a pay rise, they didn't fund it. So all it leads to is cuts. So the pay rise was a false economy. They weren't giving any new money to pay for teachers. What they were saying to schools is, you're going to have to cut, well, basically jobs, because that's the major part of your funding, in order to give the staff there a pay rise. It's like this so-called catch-up money they're putting into schools. Yes, they're giving us some catch-up money, having cut the catch-up money for Year 6 students coming to us in September. So I'm no great supporter of this government, I have to say, though, Chris. I'm no great supporter of the opposition either. They've been ineffectual. They've been virtually silent. They are the reason why we've got this thing called Brexit, because they kept quiet, couldn't take a line. They are the reason why this government's not held to account for its dozens of mistakes on the virus.
So just to go back on a point, first of all, I must say that I said in the last radio show that I did that I do agree that I think that the opposition is missing in action a little bit at the moment, I'm afraid. I'm sorry to say that, but I'm afraid they are. But when we're talking about, obviously the jobs and everything like that, then surely, and again, this is still something which we're discussing fairly consistently on this show, but then surely if we want to get the funding back into schools and the public services, then we need a strong economy. So we do need to get people back to work. So do you think that we should start reopening the economy, or do you think that it's too soon to do that?
Well, I'm a bit confused, because we were always told when this government took over, was it in 2010, was it 10 years ago, that they would have to cut all sorts of areas because there was no magic money tree. And then suddenly at the moment we hear about billions of pounds being found to pay for all sorts of things,
well,
furlough to rate relief and tax breaks and so on and so forth. There does seem to be money around for what you want it to be around for.
But we are in obviously a bit of an economic crisis at the moment, which obviously we do have the money which is going into the furlough, billions and billions, and the financial support that is being paid through the furlough and everything. But obviously that money does need to be paid back, and that's something which I do genuinely worry about from an economic side of things is how far we can stretch this until it's paid back. So surely we must need to reopen society to start paying that back just in a bit, because as you say, there is no magic money tree, and this is something which was brought about because of the situation with the pandemic. Now obviously there are investments going in certain areas of the country, but this is all money that does need to be paid back. And obviously I can tell that, you were talking about cuts earlier. Are you confident that the government are going to, return to an area of austerity, or do you think they'll find another way around it?
Well, when we're talking about where are we going to put the money, there are various lawsuits against the government at the moment for giving the money to people they met in pubs and for people who made donations to the Tory party. There's a big one on at the moment. There's money being thrown out left, right and centre to organisations that know nothing about producing PPE and have never done it. And of course we had that terrible example 2 years ago where they gave a contract to a ferry company that had no ferries. You know, so the government has done things with money other than try and keep public services over. And by the way, the National Health Service is in this crisis partly because it has been dreadfully underfunded for the last decade. And also national health workers have been dreadfully underpaid, and there's a massive recruitment crisis in the National Health Service. And then they do things like decide that we can't have any more immigration of the people that might work in the National Health Service. On top of all that, I understand that a container, I was talking to a guy 2 days ago who imports bathroom equipment, and he said that since Brexit, for a container that used to cost £1,400 is now costing 10 times that. And if you talk to the people doing shellfish in this country, we're going to take back control of our seas, you'll see that they're throwing it in the sea because Brexit at the moment, with its teething troubles, is costing the country billions. It's also a very dangerous thing if you look at Northern Ireland, because the so-called hard Brexit has meant that there are paramilitary people ordering workers to stay home from work. That was a big news item 2 weeks ago. So we have a government that acts late, that acts incorrectly. I mean, for goodness sake, Taiwan closed its borders 400 days ago. Australia closed its borders 400 days ago. Do you know Australia's had under 1,000 deaths?
Well, you know what, sir? I don't.
1,000 deaths, and our borders are still open. And when we went for Brexit, I thought it was taking control of our borders.
Well,
it's a mess. It's a mess, Chris.
I don't know if I'm not sure if you heard the last week's show, sir, but I actually had a caller on, and we were talking about the government and the handling of the pandemic, and something which we both agreed on was the borders should have been shut a long time ago. But something which you said there, sir, which I just want to get your view on, because it is very important, is that you were talking about Brexit and not allowing people, immigrants, to come and work in the NHS who we'd need to. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Because as far as I'm aware, everybody
we've got a new immigration policy that's been
the point system.
Sorry?
Are you talking about the point system?
Well, the point system, but also you've got to have a job waiting for you that pays over a certain amount of money. And I'm not sure if that amount of money is something like 27, 28 grand a year.
So that's something very similar to what something like Australia set up, where they said you need to have your own insurance and a job lined up to come and settle there. So are you saying that you disagree with that approach?
Well, hang on, we've got a shortage in the National Health Service. The National Health Service is underfunded, and the people who work in the National Health Service, just like in care homes, are paid very, very badly when compared to the national average. The people working in the National Health Service do not start work on the sort of salaries that they would need to in order to come here from another country.
We had some people on last week saying that one of the benefits of Brexit is obviously we've been able to get this vaccine through, and we're able to get it distributed faster. Do you see that as a positive of Brexit?
Yeah, well done. Well done. That's very good. I've been vaccinated because I'm quite old. Yeah, I've been vaccinated. I've had the first vaccine, and I'm the only person in my school. I think one other's had it.
Yeah.
So, okay. Yeah, brilliant. The reason why the vaccine is being done so well is because it is being run by national health workers and an army of incredible volunteers. Yeah. If you were down at the drill hall last Wednesday when I was down there, it was a fantastic operation. And the supplies of the vaccine are not via central government. So, yeah, by allowing us to have it, the government did something right. That's fantastic, and they can be congratulated on that.
Yeah.
But, you know, we got a world-beating vaccine. We are number one in the world for the deaths per head of population.
Okay.
We are number one in Europe for the effect of this economic crisis on our economy. And we've still got borders open.
I must go back to something there, because you were talking about the death toll there, because something which we were talking about last week in quite a lot of depth, and we did mention that it's a very sensitive topic, because obviously so many people have lost their lives to COVID. But obviously, do you know how the other countries in Europe at least calculate their COVID deaths?
How they do what? Sorry.
How they calculate them?
Well, I think we can play around with figures, but I reckon that any government worth its salt, if they knew a way of fiddling the figures, would not fiddle the figures, if they could manipulate them. If there's a suggestion somewhere that the French, the Germans, the Portuguese, the Spanish, the Icelandic, the Norwegians, the Denmark, the Swedes, the Lithuanians, and as well as the Russians, that they've all fiddled their figures to making them look worse. Well, that's a bit like the anti-vax saying that Microsoft want to know what I'm doing during the day, so that in the vaccine there's going to be a chip or something that is going to report my every movement.
A key thing which I have to ask people who come on here always, is there anybody in Parliament who you have seen who would have done a different and better job of this?
No, I don't think there is, and I've never been a great... it's going to sound odd, this. There's a sort of way of thinking called Anarcho-Syndicalism, which is basically that people working together and communities working together can put pressure on MPs and governments to make them do the right thing. And if you look at Myanmar and if you look at Russia, there's very, very brave people out there forcing their governments to bring about show democratic leanings, people who are going to lose their lives. What we do, we're too comfortably off, I think, to protest, and we're too self-seeking and too materialistic in this country to put the pressure on anybody in the way needed. It's a real shame. And I blame the schools. You see, I blame me. We should have allowed the children to become educated in community awareness, in societal awareness, in political awareness, and in economic awareness, whilst we were busy telling them who Ethelred the Unready was and what Edward II did. Boris Johnson's got examitis. He leaves everything until it has to be done, and he wants to be loved. So his announcements most days are all very, very optimistic and positive. And in the future, we are going to be a world-beating, open-the-pub country. It's dreadful what they've done, and they're still doing it. I think Arsenal, Tottenham Sport, Arsenal are playing a Portuguese side at football this week. Portuguese have closed their borders, so they're having to play it in Greece or somewhere. We were told that we would have control of our borders, so while we're leaving our borders open...
Yeah, no, so I listen, when it comes down to borders, that's been the number one thing that I have consistently criticised the government on. I actually find it a bit crazy how back in March, there was only one politician who was saying that we should be closing the borders, and that was Nigel Farage.
No, Priti Patel was saying it.
Priti Patel, yes, the report came out the other week that Priti Patel and Matt Hancock had both advised to close the borders, but publicly... Nigel Farage was the only politician I heard anyway back in March.
But you see, other countries in Europe are independent of each other, closing their borders to us. So that's all the lies that we get told. And you know what, Chris, in all of this, I blame myself because in 42 years I have educated the voters of today to vote for people, to be socially aware. And here we have the mess we're in now, and the Tories have still got a lead.
I don't hold the government all accountable for the 100,000 plus deaths that have occurred in this country. And the reason I don't do so is, first of all, because when we're coming down to responsibility, we must remember that the UK is divided into 4 nations who have been doing things differently. Okay, so there are 4 leaders of the UK. And as much as there are the majority of the country, without doubt, have made huge sacrifices and, stayed at home, given up seeing loved ones, given up seeing friends and family. But there are also a small proportion who are still of quite a few thousand who haven't followed the rules. And with that, there needs to be responsibility given there. And also, you were saying, you've said quite a few times today that the government haven't acted quickly enough in certain situations. But obviously, when it comes, one of the things which the government are quite consistently criticised for is the first lockdown, and did they go into it at the right time? But when Jeremy Hunt asked Chris Whitty about the timing of the lockdown, he said that Chris Whitty replied that the government followed the advice by SAGE extremely rapidly, and the delay was completely understandable given the situation at hand.
Chris Whitty, bless him. How about the fact that the first 5 COBRA meetings, the government's inner cabinet crisis meetings, the first 5, our Prime Minister did not even turn up.
And that's coming from the article, obviously, that originally came out to the public with the article that the Sunday Times released about that. But according to the article at the time, which I don't know if you listened to him at all, but even Majid Nawad, who has been quite consistently against Boris Johnson and the Conservative Party throughout his whole career, he was quoting the minutes that were saying that because of the information released by the World Health Organization gathered from Wuhan, talking about how the disease wasn't transmissible through human-to-human contact, that the minutes from the meeting were indicating that there was a low risk from the virus and there wasn't a lot to worry about.
But we can play around with this as much as you like. It's Cheltenham weekend coming up now in a couple of weeks, and all the fellas from Ireland can come over like they did last year after we knew the virus was coming. And our Liverpool home game against, I think it was AC Milan, people coming from a COVID-rich area, we let them come in. We did not lock down. And, Eat Out to Help Out and all the other things that the government has done in a half-hearted manner, they haven't helped.
Well, sir, obviously there is I hope that in a few weeks' time, or maybe a month's time, maybe when things are a little bit easier, I do hope that maybe you will come back on the show and maybe we could talk a little bit more about this and about how it's developed over the next few months. But I
tell you what, Chris, if we can get the music industry going again, the last time I saw you was at the Corn Exchange in Hartford, playing in support of Jules Addison's band. Jules and Chris, as you know, they've lost the Corn Exchange. The Corn Exchange is closed. People like Jason Ward, you remember Jason?
Mr. Ward is a legend in my eyes.
We've got him doing some lessons online. But let's hope that we can get things like that back and get open again, sensibly. And I'll be doubling the number of concerts I go to. And you never know. If you send me a track, I'll play your music on my radio show on East Arts Radio every Thursday night.
I very much appreciate that, sir. And you know what? As a former pupil of Chauncy, I know just how much the education of your students means to you, and I know how hard you work and how important you are to the school. So I do appreciate you coming on here. I appreciate you giving your views, and I'm excited for everybody to hear what you've had to say. Thank you very much, sir.
You're welcome, Chris. Good night to you.
Okay, so, ladies and gentlemen, we just heard from Mr. Dennis O'Sullivan there. Let's hear it from another side of the argument, okay? So we're now going to go to Julianne with his mark. So, Julianne, what do you think? Boris Johnson, let's go.
Well, first of all, we need to remember that no other prime minister has had to deal with this much in 1 year since World War II. We all need to remember that if you need to listen to scientists that have come on our screens, they have contradicted each other. How can the government follow the science when the science isn't clear?
How do you mean the science isn't clear?
Well, they told us we needed to go with herd immunity, right? And they also told us that the majority of people who catch this virus will recover. Next time they're saying we need to lock down. If I was prime minister, I would try and listen to the science, but the science is a mess.
Do you think Boris Johnson's done well then?
I think he's made various mistakes, and he needs to be honest about how we are going to get out of this. Public trust is declining despite his rise in the polls. However, he took a gamble on these vaccines and won. The Lib Dems and Labour wanted us in the EU vaccine plan. Thank God Boris didn't listen to them.
But going back to what you said about, being honest about how we're going to get out of this, obviously he did say that come the spring, we're going to see, a much more sort of normal country. I think that if that doesn't happen, I think he will lose a lot of support, even within his own party, because people, I think, have reached the limit, and I think that people are looking for him for hope. So,
but look at the other stuff he's doing. He's invested more in the NHS than any other government. He's given nurses, teachers, and doctors a pay rise despite the financial crash.
Well, we had a caller who said that the teachers wouldn't be getting a pay rise for a few years, so I'll have to clarify that once this interview.
Look it up. I have family that work in schools, and they have said they will have received a pay rise by 5.5%.
In a BBC interview with Laura Koonsberg, Boris Johnson said that the government takes full responsibility of everything that's happened in this pandemic. What's your view on, as I've asked the last two guests who have spoken about this, the death toll that we have in this country, and how that relates to Boris Johnson and how he's handled this pandemic?
But you can't have it both ways. If you claim Boris is responsible for all the COVID deaths, he's also responsible for all the lives saved by his gamble on the vaccines.
Well, let's hope that this vaccine process does pull off and that it is a success. And obviously, we have to thank the volunteers and the NHS for the hard work they are doing to really rapidly get this vaccine through. And as of reporting today, early data is showing that the vaccine is having a great effect. So here's hoping it continues. Julian, thank you so much for coming on the show. You are always welcome back here.
Thank you for having me. Take care.
Some things I agree there with Julianne, some things I agreed with Dennis. Very interesting. Just to clarify the point on teachers' pay rise, if you want to go to the gov.uk website, it says that Education Secretary accepts all recommendations to award teachers and the largest pay increase in a generation, with new teachers to receive a 5.5% boost in salary. It does go into more depth about area and which teachers apply for this, so feel free to look that up and make your own judgment on that. Look, I think that there isn't a button and a box to tick as an answer to this whole pandemic, if I'm honest. I think that, we can try and compare ourselves to other countries, but we have to remember that we are different to other countries, and that the structural foundation of our country is different. A lot of people do like to draw the comparison between the UK and New Zealand, but I don't think you can do that. And I genuinely am. I think it's great what New Zealand have done. I think they have genuinely done very well. But I don't think that you could have done that for every country. We are a small country. We are a very dense country. We are very, very populated, considering how small the country we are. And also we are a huge travel hub. You had reports saying that only a few months ago, saying that COVID was probably in France by November 2019. If it was there, then it was probably here. It had entered Europe. It's not like the virus was already somewhere else and it was, shut off the borders and stop the enemy coming in. The enemy was already here, and I think that part of the arguments against closing the borders, though I still think we should have closed the borders, was the fact that it wouldn't have as much of an effect because the virus was already here. Now, when we talk about the rules and the regulations that have come in place and lockdown and everything, we aren't a country that's had to do this before. Now, yes, everyone was very scared at the beginning, and the government did lock down quite slowly. They closed the pubs, then they closed the schools, and then they told us to stay at home. Now, you could argue that Boris Johnson should have just come on our screen and said, right, pubs are closed, schools are closed, everybody stay at home, there's a virus, we need to stay at home, and that's it. But look at how slow he did it, and look at the panic we saw in the supermarkets. Look at people who were hoarding toilet paper, food supplies. That was it during a slow, calm process of locking down. I have a feeling that if he'd just come on our screen and said we must lock down, nobody can be out after this time, I think that there would have been anarchy. Simply because we are not a country that's had to, follow this, certain regulation of rules in my lifetime. Nowhere close. We are an extremely free society. And, when you think about how things are now as how things were, before the pandemic, it just makes you realise just how free and lucky we are to live in this country. I especially feel extremely privileged. But when it comes down to Boris Johnson and the actual handling of the pandemic, I think that you need to look back further before you actually get to that point. Because first of all, we need to bear in mind that obviously there are reports now saying that COVID was around before, January 2020, so indicating that it was about, in 2019, possibly, spread around Europe in 2019. So we need to figure out why it wasn't notified to us beforehand. And then again, you have to start there where the outbreak began in Wuhan. And then we need to go to the World Health Organization, because they published on their social media to the world that this virus was not transmissible through human-to-human contact. Well, that was wrong, wasn't it? There's nothing that spells out take care more than there's nothing to worry about. And we had scientists on our screen saying that there is a low risk in the UK and there isn't a lot to worry about. Now, we were talking earlier about the Cobra meetings that Boris Johnson missed. Well, first of all, I have to point this out. How many meetings do you think Boris Johnson has to go to a day? How many meetings do you think the Prime Minister has to attend each day? How many things do you think the Prime Minister has to overlook? There are a reason you have ministers of certain departments for these things. Now, according to the article by the Sunday Times, which was evaluated by Imagine Noir, it was indicating that the minutes was suggesting that the information given was low risk, and we had scientists on our screens on BBC News, on other services, saying that this was a low risk for the UK and that we shouldn't worry about it. Now, don't get me wrong, at first, when we had the screening process in place for people who are coming back from COVID areas, from China and places where the outbreak was quite high, I thought that the government were genuinely doing quite well. I was quite impressed. But then, we need to have a chat about why that stopped. And that, again, that's criticism. We have to criticise, because don't get me wrong, if you are somebody who thinks that the government have done absolutely nothing wrong in this pandemic, the government have already said that they have made mistakes. You can be a conservative, you can support Boris Johnson, you can support the government, and you can admit this the same way that you can be a Labour voter and admit that, there were problems with Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, hence the last general election. That's why we have to get past this nonsense of political tribalism. But yeah, going back to the evaluation of it, I can only criticise what I think at the time, and I remember back in March thinking we need to close the borders. So I am actually going to be asking Mr. Rob Halfon about this later on when he comes on our show. But a lot of the criticism that we have is in hindsight. Genuinely in hindsight, it's very easy for us to look back and say you should have done this, but we have to bear in mind the implications for it. When you go into a lockdown, you need to bear in mind about how much, it takes to come out of it, the economic damage. And also, we kind of talk about the economy and jobs and stuff as though that's not key and important. We have to remember the jobs in the economy affect our lives, and literally our lives. We have the NHS, we have police, we have fire service, we have top grade public services. We cannot maintain those without a top grade economy, and the economy is being ruined. Now, it's not the government's fault the economy is being ruined. We had the shadow chancellor tweeting about how the Conservatives have ruined the economy. Well, and when she was doing this, she was highlighting that America's economy has done all right. So maybe we should have taken a Trump approach. Maybe we shouldn't have given the furlough scheme the support that it did. And, maybe we shouldn't have given out all the loans that we did, the government loans. So, again, maybe I'm hoping that somebody from the Labour Party will come on next week and discuss this with me, because I think it would be very interesting to hear their points of view. So, yeah, look, I support a public inquiry into the government's handling, just because I think that, there are a lot of things which are being questioned right now. For example, one of them is the care homes. Why were people sent back into care homes without being tested? Now, Mike Graham says that wasn't down to the government. You get other people who are saying it was. And so this is something which does need to be addressed, because that is huge, and the government needs to be held accountable for it if they're responsible. But one thing which I will say, the last thing which I will say on Boris Johnson to conclude, is that a lot of people thought that he was the clone of Trump, so to speak. I think that is rubbish. That is absolute nonsense. You know, this is a guy who, during the referendum, the Leave campaign, he was calling for an amnesty for illegal immigrants who have been here and contributed to our society for years. You know, this is the same man who is now pledging to help poorer countries with our excess vaccine dosage, and he's trying to rally out other world leaders to contribute to that. I don't think that he's the right-wing Trump clone that people thought he was. Now, we will leave that there, and we will evaluate more of that over the weeks to come. But now we are going to move over to our first first politician to ever come onto this show with me. I'm extremely grateful. Mr. Rob Halfon, MP for Harlow, chairman of the Education Committee, is going to be joining us. We're going to be talking a little bit about schools. We're going to be talking about the vaccine. We're going to be talking about funding for the NHS. Should teachers and support staff be vaccinated in priority? I won't delay it any further. We will go over to our first interview with the politician himself, Mr. Rob Halfon. Here we go. Okay, so I'm very excited to be joined by my next guest. I contacted a man who, I'm not sure if he's aware of this, but in Ian Dale's book, Why Can't We All Just Get Along, he's described as a man who absolutely everyone always gets on with. Extremely excited to be joined by Mr. Robert Halfon, chairman of the Education Committee and MP for Harlow. Mr. Halfon, how are you, sir?
I'm very well, thank you. Nice to be on your programme.
Thank you so much.
Nice to speak to you again.
Yes, you too, sir, you too. So I'm going to go straight into it because I know that you are a busy man. So we now have the 15 million most vulnerable have now been vaccinated. Is it time to reopen schools?
Well, I hope very much that schools will reopen on the 8th of March, as the Prime Minister has said, because the last year has been pretty tough for our nation's young people. I described it as the four horsemen of the education apocalypse galloping towards our children, because we know there's been, despite the efforts of brilliant teachers and support staff, there's been a huge loss of educational learning. There's a massive increase in mental health problems amongst young people. There is also safeguarding hazards that some of them have faced, exposed to online harms, exposed to county line gangs, exposed to very tough situations possibly at home. And finally, we know that the Institute for Fiscal Studies have said the school closures mean that the average young person might lose around £40,000 over their lifetime in lost earnings or lost wages. So this is pretty bad. So we need to get the kid back into school, especially now we've got so many, the elderly and the clinically vulnerable, almost vaccinated.
And do you feel so? Obviously, I know that there was a report that came out yesterday from Public Health England claiming that they believe that primary schools were safe. Do you believe that both primary schools and secondary schools are both safe at the moment to go back on the 8th of March?
Well, I've made it my business to follow the official science. The reason that I just made that decision was because I'm not an epidemiologist, I'm not an expert. So to me, if Public Health England is saying primary schools are safe, if, as other studies have come out today, scientific studies recognised by the government have come out that schools are not responsible for major transmission, thank God, of this awful disease, and that teachers and support staff, thank goodness, are no greater risk than any other profession. I think, given the harms that I've just mentioned to you in terms of children, most children not being at school, we should do everything possible to get our schools open again on the 8th of March. Okay,
and you were saying there that you that the it's come out that teachers and support staff are at no greater risk than any other profession. Do you believe that we should be vaccinating as a priority teachers and support staff?
Yes, so the Chief Medical Officer said this, that teachers and support staff were at no greater risk than any other profession. Thank goodness. Having said that, the problem is that if a teacher or support staff member gets the COVID, even if it's just a moderate case and one or two teachers get it, it means often either the school has to close, a year group has to go home, a bubble, whatever you want to call it. And so what I want to see is once the schools open, they stay open. And the answer to this, I think, is that once we've done the clinically vulnerable and the elderly and anyone at risk, and I'd like people with learning disabilities to be moved up the priority list as well. Once we've done all that, let's ensure that teachers and support staff are vaccinated as a high priority, not because they're a special case although I think teachers and support staff are so incredibly important, because education is the most important thing we can do in our society for our young people, but because I just want the schools to open and to stay open. And if that helps, it's well worth it.
Excellent. No, I completely agree with you, sir, and I think that is a priority that we as a country should look to, and I think that the government is right when they say that schools are the priority that should be open first. Now, I'm not one of these people who, obviously, we do have quite a harsh and strong and a very sad death toll in this country. Now, I'm not one of the people who holds the government completely responsible, but one of the criticisms that I've always had are the borders. Now, do you think that we should have shut the borders in the beginning, as Priti Patel and Matt Hancock advised, or do you think that the Prime Minister was right to keep them open?
So that's a really important question, because when all this started at the beginning, you do wonder, last year, before we knew what it was, and no one had any idea, and none of us thought it was going to spread around the world, and the millions of people would lose their lives. I did wonder why we didn't close the borders at the very beginning. The problem for us is, whilst great countries like New Zealand have been able to do it, and I have massive respect for the Prime Minister there, is that we are a country that has hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people arrive in England every day. That, a significant part of our exports and imports come from overseas. We have loads of imports coming in every day. And so just loads of people coming in for business reasons. So for a country like ours, that is an international hub, that is the centre of so much activity across Europe, it's very, very difficult just to say shut the borders. And the other problem is, of course, we live near Stansted Airport, you and I. Stansted Airport is a great airport. They have thousands and thousands of people employed. There's many jobs. They have they've employed many apprentices, something I care about very deeply. And these airports are on their knees at the moment because of what is going on. And so you have to walk the balance between the tightrope of actually, trying to make sure that people don't come here with disease, but also not destroying thousands of jobs in our economy. And that is a difficult one for the government. I welcome the new quarantine measures, and maybe that could have been done earlier. The testing, everyone should be tested as they arrive, wherever they come from. We have got bans, I think we're about 33 countries which have got high COVID, including Brazil, where there's that big variant. And mainly the people coming here at the moment, I think they've reduced it from hundreds of thousands to between 15 to 20,000 a day, if not lower than that. So I'm not trying to give you a politician's answer, but there is no easy answer to this. But perhaps, if looking back with hindsight, maybe if we closed the borders straight away. But I think that no one understood what this disease was or what was going to happen.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. No, I am one of these people who I can understand where you're coming from, and I do understand that obviously we do have a huge population. We are a massive travel hub where people come into work and to travel, and I do understand the issues with closing the borders, but I also do feel as though with the issues of new variants that could put. Now I know that at the moment, with the information we've been given, the vaccines should still be effective to the point of stopping hospitalisations and deaths, hopefully. But I just think that maybe having slightly tighter border controls could benefit to make sure that we return to a normality as quickly as possible. Now, obviously, as well as the health crisis, we are going to be in a financial crisis for quite some time. I had Dennis O'Sullivan, the headmaster of Chauncy School, on earlier, and he was speaking about how he feels as though the NHS are, consistently underfunded. Now, obviously, in the last manifesto, which the government were elected on, they were talking about further funding for the NHS, getting more nurses in, building more hospitals. With the financial crisis that's ahead, are we sure that that is not going to affect the NHS?
Absolutely not. I mean, the government, I think, committed an extra 20 billion to the NHS. There's been many more billions spent on the NHS, rightly, owed during the during this awful pandemic. I mean, I believe there is an umbilical cord between the British people and the National Health Service. I would fight for it to my dying day. And I've been very lucky to have been treated from it because I had problems with my legs at a very young age. So what I would, I absolutely believe the government is going to meet its manifesto commitments and will continue, and is actually meeting them much more by spending a lot more than the NHS and anyone ever envisaged. I mean, the figures are eye-watering if you look at them in the round. So, of course, it will never be enough. There'll always be more money needed for the NHS. I think the public want the NHS as it is. I don't think they want to change to any kind of private or insurance system. And we have to have a contract with the public to say, yes, this is the money we're going to spend. It may affect, spending in other areas, but it's what the public want us to spend money on.
Yeah. Okay, I'm glad to hear that, sir, and I do hope that with the financial challenges that come, I do hope that the NHS is still continue to be funded to the high level that I am now seeing going into it, and I hope that also the doctors and nurses continue to be taken care of financially as well. Now, Sir Charles Walker, what made quite a bit of stirrings, I think a lot of people to what he said quite well, and considering I know that Twitter is a dangerous place for politicians from all parties, but he seemed to get quite a good response when he was saying that we cannot cancel life to preserve life, and that the current situation that we are in with lockdown isn't sustainable for people's mental health or emotional well-being, and he says that we do need to learn to live with a certain amount of COVID deaths. Now, is he right?
I loved Sir Charles Walker. He's my constituency neighbour, and he could not. I know him very well. He's one of the kindest, most dedicated MPs you could ever want to represent you. And he's always helped me, even when I was a candidate. Before I was elected to Parliament. He's just one of those people who just tries to do good all the time. I think that he speaks. If you imagine this is a heart and head argument, I imagine he speaks to the hearts of thousands, if not millions of people, because this tightrope is a really tough one. Because on one side, you've just been talking about the NHS. You've got to protect health, protect the NHS, and make sure this virus doesn't spread with the new mutations. One of them, which is in the nasing areas, I understand, of South Africa, but thank goodness only a small amount. But and on the other side, you've got to think about people's livelihoods, their jobs, the economy, their mental health, their well-being, and without a doubt, he is right that people have really struggling with this, and I see it every day. I meet and talk to businesses who are losing their businesses or losing their livelihoods. People who've lost their jobs. So we have to make sure, and that's why I say Charles Walker speaks with the heart of so many people during the lockdown, that we have a route map that out of this, that I've said that what the Prime Minister should do, or number 10 is, should go down to Halford's in Harlow if need be, buy the best GPS system ever invented, and give us a direction of travel out of this coronavirus. Now we have so many people vaccinated, because people need hope. They need to see that there is an end to this, and that this lockdown will be the last one, because I don't think if we all come out that people will sustain being locked up again at home. It's damaging to business, it's damaging to people's mental health, it's damaging to kids, as we talked about earlier in your interview, and we've got to get out of this as soon as possible.
I completely agree with everything you said there, and I must say I do agree with Charles Walker as well, and it sounds as though you're on a very similar path to what he was saying. Now, with this roadmap that we're hopefully going to be getting in only just over a week's time, do you think that we will see that roadmap that will lead us back to normality, or do you think it will lead us back to a certain restriction-based?
Well, anything is better than nothing. I'm not I'm happy with incremental changes, but the sooner the better, particularly just helping people's jobs and livelihoods. I would also like a change made. That at the moment we're not allowed to see any friends or relatives unless outside for an hour in very strict social distancing. I don't think you're even allowed to sit on a bench at the moment, or with another person. I may be wrong about that, but it's pretty strict. What I hope very much is when the restrictions are lifted, they allow one bubble to be designated per household.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, let's say you were my bubble, you'd be the one friend that I would be allowed to go and see.
Yeah.
And I think that is very important, because it's not just family, but people are really, really missing their friendships. And I'm not bothered about masks and social distancing. I can't stand wearing masks, but I don't care that if we have to wear them for a while yet. I don't mind if we have to social distance either. But what I do think people want to do is to be able to meet up at least and meet. Surely they can make the restrictions a bit better when we come out of this lockdown, to at least say at the beginning you can meet with one other household. You designate one household, and I think that would be quite reasonable for the government to consider. I think it would make people feel a whole lot better that things were, this awful time is ending for us.
Absolutely. Mr. Halfon, thank you so much for coming on. I know that my listeners will appreciate it, and I very much appreciate it. Thank you so much, and I hope that you will come on again in the future.
I'd be delighted, and thank you.
So there we have it, Mr. Robert Halfon as the first politician to enter conversation with Chris. Now, I'm extremely grateful to Mr. Halfon for coming on, and I also must say, I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, but back in 2019, when the Brexit withdrawal agreement came about, he was very, very good, because I had some genuine, very big concerns about it that I was very worried about, and I had absolutely no relevance to political journalism. I still don't really, or anything like that. But he still invited me to Parliament. We debated it, we went through it, and he gave up a lot of his time to discuss it with me. And I'm genuinely grateful that he is always happy to give me some of his time whenever I ask for it. So hopefully Mr. Halfon will return on Conversation with Chris in the future. Now, I must point out that after we did the interview, we actually had some questions that came in from some of the listeners to Mr. Halfon, but we'd already done the interview. So hopefully, if he comes back on again, which I hope he will, we can get some of those questions through. So like I say, convochris@gmail.com, email us, have your say, send your questions in, and I will announce in advance when we are having politicians on. I must also point out that any political interviews that we do with politicians, they can also be found on the Conversation with Chris YouTube channel, which will be launched this Sunday. Now, speaking of politicians, we are about to wrap up, but I'm very excited to say that next week Mr. Charles Walker, MP for Broxbourne, will be joining us. Now, Mr. Walker has been very, very critical of the government and lockdowns during his recent interviews on Sky News, Channel 4 News, and other various media sources, which is perfect, as next week we will be discussing Boris Johnson's roadmap out of this lockdown. We will be discussing the future of lockdowns, the mental health strain that it's had on the country. We will also be talking a little bit about the government's environmental policy. We have somebody who's going to come on and tell us a little bit more about that. And we are also going to be talking in length about the Labour Party and the opposition, how they've responded in this pandemic, because the opposition are genuinely very, very important. I have, of course, written off to 2 Labour MPs and asked if one of them would like to come on the show and speak to us a little bit about that. As of yet, we've had no reply, but it is still a week to go. We would very much like it if we could have a member of Parliament from the Labour Party come on and speak to us a little bit about the opposition, speak to us a little bit about their view on how the country can recover after this. So, it's not a grilling, it's just a general interview. We would have had 2 Conservative politicians who would have been on after next week. So we do want to get members of Parliament from various parties. So we will also be reaching out to the Lib Dems and the Green Party as well. And we will be getting councillors and just general members of the party on to come and see. But obviously we would have had 2 members of Parliament of the Conservative Party come on. So we do want to have some members of Parliament from the Labour Party as well, because the opposition are genuinely important. And I'm sure that they should have quite a lot to say. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me this evening. If you want to get involved in next week's topics, be it the environment, be it lockdown, mental health and emotional welfare of the people in this country, or some views on the Labour Party. Have they done well? Are they not doing so well? Why are they behind in the polls? Give us your view. Let's arrange a call. convochris@gmail.com. Drop me an email and we will arrange a telephone interview. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Have a lovely evening.
This is Bernie here, and I want to tell you all about my show. It's out and about in the local community. It's on between 4 and 6 p.m. every weekday. That's Monday through to Friday. Do take part and do listen up. So there are lots of little interviews with people in the local community. There's kids chipping in with jokes to try and keep us cheered up during these difficult times. We've got features on local bands with their local recordings. We've got local singers taking part. We've got interviews with lots of local people. It's all about us in the local community. Yeah, so if you've written a short story, send it in and I can read it out for you. Do get in touch with us. We're out and about in the local community.
You're listening to East Arts Radio. You're listening to East Arts Radio. You're listening to East Arts Radio.
Boris Johnson has reaffirmed a commitment to increase defence spending by £24 billion in the next 4 years. He's been explaining where that money will go.
We will focus our investment on the new technologies that will revolutionise warfare, artificial intelligence,